All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair, and this is State of the Braves. Well, guys, in the last two episodes, we have previewed the Braves offense, both the infield and the outfield, and today we're going to turn our attention to the starting staff of the Atlanta Braves. And not to sound like a broken record, but this area of the Braves team is really good too. I mean, it makes me sound like a homer, and honestly, guys, I am a homer, but um, it's really hard to find weaknesses on this team. And outside of maybe some bench depth for the position players, there's just much, not much weakness on this team. So, guys, let's dive into the Braves starting staff. And remember, the Braves went into this offseason knowing they needed to address the starting rotation. Of course, Kyle Wright going down with his shoulder injuries and then eventually getting shipped off to Kansas City was a part of that. The unfortunate kind of how everything ended with Michael Soroka and him being shipped to the White Sox, and some other injuries and this and that. And the Braves clearly needed a starting pitcher. And also just looking back at how the postseason ended last year, needing another, not just starting pitcher, but a playoff caliber starting pitcher. I would say the additions of Chris Sale and Reynaldo Lopez have gone a long way in solving those issues. I think Lopez is much more of a depth move. He's going to be potentially used in the starting rotation, potentially in the bullpen. We'll get into that later in this episode. But Chris Sale, the ceiling and the track record say that he can still be a dominant pitcher when he's on the mound. It's all about health. You've heard it from me and probably others. Every time his name comes up, you kind of have that qualifier that as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be really good. I still absolutely believe that. I love him, especially if you can consider him a number 3 starter on this team. Some will say he's a 4 behind Morton, but I think he's still the 3 because when he's healthy, he is better than Charlie and younger by about 5 years. So we'll certainly dive into Chris Sale a good bit in this episode as well. So, guys, look, in 2023, the Braves were forced to patch together their starting rotation. I mean, you'll remember it basically from spring training on. We get the news that Kyle Wright goes down with his shoulder issues. And then Max Fried early in the season is dealing with elbow inflammation. And it's a scramble. It felt like the entire season to cover innings. Now, of course, it didn't end up harming the Braves in terms of their overall record. They win 104 games, and in large part, that was due to the 3 starting pitchers who did step up throughout the entire season, and also a historic Braves offense. And that offense is coming back. I mean, let's not forget that. I don't know that we can necessarily expect historic numbers again, though. I mean, I kind of do. But even if they don't bring that this year and they take a step back, I really think that this pitching staff is improved for sure. So just thinking back to early 2023, you had guys like Jared Schuster and Dylan Dodd and Bryce Elder called upon very early to fill holes. Dylan Dodd and Schuster broke camp, and basically within a week or so, Bryce Elder was being called upon after Max Fried went down. And Elder, it's probably easy to forget how good he was in the first half of the year because the second half was so bad. But that was a big deal for him to stem the tide and bring some consistency every 5 days in the early season. Of course, Dodd and Schuster really never proved themselves. Schuster has since been moved on to the White Sox as well, while Dylan Dodd is still in the system. Guys like Alan Winans and Darius Vines and A.J. Smith-Shawver were all called upon multiple times for spot starts as well. And so it was very much a patchwork of figuring out the 2023 Braves rotation. And I'm certain that Alex Anthopoulos went into this offseason wanting to improve the depth of the starting staff and in hopes that you don't have quite the revolving door this year of starters. I mean, it was almost historic in terms of what the Braves had to do to get through the season, and it was very odd for a team to be able to win 104 games with that kind of starting pitching uh, literally rotation, right? Just a rotation in and out, down to AAA and back for a lot of these guys. So of all of these pitchers that I just mentioned, only AJ Smith-Shawver, I would say, has kind of next level stuff, like raw stuff that can really dominate or potentially shut down some teams. But he was only 20 years old at the time. So even, he definitely experienced some struggles. He didn't see a ton of action, only about 25 innings last year. And you had some good starts by these guys. I want to give them some props. I mean, Darius Vines and Alan Winans, I think, really for the stuff that they're bringing, they stepped up very ably when they were called upon. But then, of course, we know that Elder, like I said, had a great first half, a really weak second half, seemed to wear down. I think most people think that's what was going on with him, just wearing down in terms of innings pitched, getting tired, weakening his command, and his game is all about command and be able to place his pitches in the right spots. When he's able to do that, he's effective. Literally earned himself an all-star appearance because of that, but it just was not there in the second half for him last year. So going into this season, clearly Alex has built a deeper group of high-level arms. And in this episode, we're really just focusing on the starting staff. Um, I might get into the bullpen in a later episode. I'm kind of trying to weigh, guys, how much time I have before the season starts. I mean, we are still in early March, but I want to bring you guys several other high content episodes of, previewing the rest of the year. I do love our bullpen as well. I think it's another strength of the team and some really, strong characters and dudes who I think are going to play a huge role for the Braves this season. But again, this episode, we're going to focus on the starting staff. All right, so let's go into some player breakdowns, and then I'll kind of give you my thoughts on the group as a whole, and also want to just do a little bit of comparison to some of the other top teams in the National League, and also maybe a comparison or contrast to some previous Braves starting staffs, and how I think this group lines up with those groups. All right, so let's start with Spencer Strider. His 2023 was very, very good. He was the only 20-game winner in the National League. He won 20 games, lost 5, 3.86 ERA, which I know for him and his standards was a little high. But everything else about Strider's season was dominant. I mean, especially his strikeout rate, really historic numbers here, a 36.8% strikeout rate. From a starter is just absurd. He had a 5.5 WAR according to Fangraphs, and again, a little bit more luck with balls in play. That ERA goes down, and he maybe wins a Cy Young, but he was certainly a top 5 pitcher in the National League. And coming off of this otherworldly strikeout rate, this higher ERA, that high ERA, it was just, you guys will remember this, multiple blow up starts where he couldn't get out of the big inning. And it was just several of those really frustrating starts that seemed to come out of nowhere, where he'd give up 5 or 6 runs, and he just could not limit the damage in those starts. I talked about it a lot last season. It seemed like when he would come into a game and his stuff was just a tick off, maybe his fastball was 97 instead of 99, maybe his slider wasn't quite as sharp. He just was not able to get through some of those starts. And weirdly enough, it tended to be against some of the lesser teams, like the Tigers and the Nationals and those types of teams. But I will say this. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Spencer Strider. I'm a big believer in this guy. I love his mentality. Really, since the Braves got bumped from the playoffs by the Phillies, his mentality has been excellent. I think he's really stepped into a leadership role on this team, and he's clearly an intense competitor who wants to win and is not happy with his own early career success. I think that is one of the best traits that Strider has. Is he's one of the most talented, capable pitchers, young pitchers in baseball, and he's clearly constantly trying to tweak his game, improve his game, and find other ways to get better and better. And I think that is what's going to make him an elite pitcher probably for the rest of his career, as long as his arm holds up. So in terms of his early spring, what I'm seeing early on in spring from him, a lot of positives, especially, and you guys have probably heard about this. Spencer Strider has added a curveball, and he's gone through at least last year. There was a lot of talk of him trying to add a changeup. He didn't throw it much last year. Every now and then you would see it. Every now and then he'd get a strikeout with it, but it was obviously not a pitch he ever felt super confident with. And it wasn't one that you saw him work on a lot in spring training. He would just bring it out occasionally. The fact that he has really committed to this curveball, I'm sure he was working on it well before he showed up to spring camp. And he's been throwing it a good bit in spring and with some really good results. So this is incredibly encouraging to me. It's always been talked about that Spencer Strider is basically like a two-pitch pitcher. It's almost like he's a closer coming out there as a starter with closer stuff. And almost like a Craig Kimbrell with he's got just that fastball and slider. But to be able to add a curveball, which is coming at you from a different angle and at a different speed, it's kicking down into a lower gear compared to that slider. I think it potentially makes Strider just that much more dominant. And I think a lot of those bad starts he had last year, where he was giving up 5 or 6 runs, giving up crooked numbers in certain innings, by adding a curveball, adding that third look, I really think it makes him much. It will make him be able to avoid those bad starts a lot more. So I'm just very excited to see him go full out in regular season games with a 3-pitch mix. The slider has always been good, but it works so well because his fastball is so dominant. And guys are up there and they have to cheat to the fastball to catch up to it. I mean, it's really how they have to play it. And so the slider has always played up really well because of that. But if the fastball is playing down a little bit, that's when he becomes susceptible. And so now that you have a third pitch at a geared down speed, he can play the curveball off the slider. He can play every pitch off of each other. And you could go up uh, to an at bat to see Spencer Strider. You're gearing up for the fastball the whole time, and he could never throw you one and still be effective and get you out. So I'm really excited to see this mentality that he's got to come in and dominate on top of this new pitch. So yeah, looking forward to seeing that in full action. I've been able to see him a little bit in spring thus far, and it looks really good. So my expectation for Strider in 2024, many people are going to have Strider on their short list for Cy Young favorites, and I don't know why you wouldn't. He probably has the best stuff in baseball, pure stuff. And if it all comes together for him in 2024, I think he wins the Cy Young. And that's honestly what I'm expecting of him. I know that's really, really high expectations. But if he stays healthy, one, right, stay healthy. Two, the curveball proves to be effective. And three, he can limit the big inning. Then I think he wins the Cy Young. His strikeout numbers are so dominant. I don't think those are going to go down too much. But even if they went down a little bit, he's still the best strikeout pitcher in baseball. So now if you lower your ERA, you get a few more wins, a few more innings, that sort of thing. He wins the Cy Young. And so, yeah, I think at the very least, he will be at the end of 2024. He'll be the strikeout leader in baseball again, and he'll probably be the wins leader again because he's on the best team in baseball. And all that sets up really well for him to be the Cy Young favorite. Now, speaking of Cy Young favorites, I mean, you can't not mention Max Fried as well. He does have to stay healthy, and that's been some of the frustration recently. I'm sure for him personally, it's been frustrating. His 2023 Max was 8-1 with a 2.55 ERA. So when he was on the mound, he was really effective, but he only made 14 starts last year. That was good for a 1.9 WAR, according to Fangraphs. But yeah, coming off this injury interrupted season and coming into his walk year, you can bet that Max Fried is incredibly motivated to go out, prove he's already proven that he's one of the better pitchers in all of baseball, but to prove that he can stay fully healthy and be counted on, be relied upon, I'm sure is something that is on his mind a tremendous amount. Max has a career ERA right around 3. He has been consistently great for basically his entire career. He is twice finished in the top 5 in Cy Young voting. He had a runner-up Cy Young just 2 years ago. So he and Strider are one of the best 1-2 punches in all of baseball when it comes to pitching staffs. And yeah, they probably are two of the top 10 best pitchers in all of baseball. And Fried is, I think it's fair to say that he might be the more consistent of the two, at least to this point in his career when he's on the mound. But he has been inconsistent lately of being on the mound, especially in the big moments, which I can't blame him. I mean, it does seem just fairly random, 2022, he's got the stomach flu, stomach virus. 2023, he's got a blister issue. He came back and pitched, but he clearly wasn't himself, wasn't quite sharp leading into that playoff start. So the timing of his health, I think, is really important. Yeah, you want him to be on the mound and make 30 starts. That would be awesome. But the bigger thing is make 25 starts and be fully healthy and ready to go for the playoffs like he was in 2021. And obviously we saw how massive that was for the Braves and their success in 2021. We need a healthy Max Fried in the playoffs. So the early spring look for Max, Max looks like Max. His last start wasn't super sharp, 3 innings pitched, 4 runs, but it's early in spring. You're not really worried too much about, especially for a pitcher like Max who's so good and so consistent. You're not really worried about his performance yet. It is early. The biggest thing is that he seems fully healthy. I watched his game the other day, and he was getting fastballs up around 97. So his velocity is certainly there. It's probably just him getting a feel for those off-speed pitches, which I'm sure he will. My expectation for Max, it's hard to project health. He's got to stay away from these blister issues. But again, if he can get into 28 starts for the season, something like that, I think he'll be an all-star. He's going to be a consistent performer. He'd probably be a top 10 Cy Young finisher again if he does that. And yeah, we know that this is his walk year and that, he may or may not, he might not be back in 2025. But even if this is his last year for the Braves, let's make it an awesome one. Let's send him out with maybe his second World Series ring. If nothing else, that would be fine. All right, let's go on to Chris Sale. So his 2023, of course, was with the Boston Red Sox. He was 6-5 with a 4.30 ERA and 20 starts in 102 innings pitched. This was good for a 2.1 WAR season. And this was the most starts Sale has made since he made 25 starts in 2019. 2019 was the last really, really good season for Sale. He had 7 or 8 dominant seasons in a row. But of course, we talked about it a good bit. He's had about 4 seasons of just lost baseball. And so he kind of finally got back on the mound consistently, somewhat consistently last year. But in 2012 through 2019, you can make a case that he was the best pitcher in all of baseball. Even though he didn't win a Cy Young in any of those years, he was top 3 or 4 in pretty much every year in Cy Young voting. But his stuff was great back then, and his stuff still looks really good, guys. He still has the stuff to be great. Even last year, as he was just coming off of his injuries, he had 11 Ks per 9 innings. His stuff was still there. Now the early look, how does he look in spring training? He looks really good. His fastball is mid-90s, 95, 96. His slider is as good as it's always been. It's dominant. This guy is fun to watch. He's really tough. I was watching a spring training game I think it was yesterday, and he was not getting calls, and he got a couple guys on base and ended up, a couple runs scoring, but he's fiery, and I just like his attitude. And I, we've talked about it a lot, but I think this edge and this attitude that he brings to the team, he's just a fiery competitor, and I think that is going to rub off on a lot of these Braves players in a good, fresh way. And obviously you need him to go out there and perform on the field as well. And looking forward for him to do that. So my expectations for Chris Sale, I'll keep repeating it, but if he stays healthy, I still think he's really great. Fangraphs only has him their projections. I'm not talking about projections as much in this episode, but I will for Sale. So they have him for a 3.80 ERA this year in 145 innings pitched and a 2.8 WAR. And I can kind of buy the ERA and innings pitched. I can kind of see that, but I think the WAR number is off simply because anytime he's been on the mound for for that much, 150 innings or more, he's been a dominant pitcher when he's been out there. And I don't see any evidence that has stopped being the case. So I really think Sale is going to provide a tremendous amount. He's highly motivated. He's on a great team, and I think it's scary. I think he's looking to bounce back in a really major way. And if there's any way he could make about 25 starts this season, I think he'll win 15 of them. I think he'll have a 4 WAR season, and I'll think he'll continue to have huge strikeout numbers. And honestly, I think it's a long shot, but I actually think he still has Cy Young stuff in his arm. I mean, if he were to um, put together a season where he stayed healthy the whole season, I think he could still be in the Cy Young race, totally. So I'm not sitting here saying it's going to happen, but I think he has that in him still, and I certainly think it's possible that this year is a huge career renaissance for Chris Sale. So yeah, bring the attitude, bring the competitive fire, and go out and make about 25 starts and be healthy for the playoffs. And this is going to be a huge addition for the Braves. All right, let's go on to Charlie Morton. His 2023, he was 14-12 with a 3.64 ERA and 163 innings. This was a 2.7 WAR season, which honestly, for a 39-year-old, when you're contributing that, hey, good on you. I mean, Charlie has been Mr. Consistent for the Braves. I know there can be frustration with some of his performances. Sometimes he will go out there and he just doesn't have it. He is pretty much a two-pitch pitcher with that fastball and curveball. And if the curveball's not landing because it really is his number one pitch, and he pitches kind of in reverse, more off the curveball than off the fastball. So if the curveball's not there for some reason, he's going to struggle. But I think Morton, this is the better situation for him. I view him as the number 4 starter. I view him as starting pitching depth and a guy that, can eat you some innings throughout the course of a season. And if he is healthy for the playoffs, he has playoff experience. I think you're not asking him to be your number 2 starter. If he's your number 4 starter in the playoffs and he makes one start in a 7-game series, okay, I'm good with that, and I feel confident with that if he's healthy and raring to go. Obviously, he wasn't healthy last postseason, and that definitely hurt the Braves. But generally speaking, Charlie has been a great Brave. He's remained really solid. Yeah, I think his arm is going to be fine. I mean, there's been no issue with his arm or his velocity as he's going into his age 40 season. It's probably just the other things. He had that finger ligament issue last year. Let's just hope his body doesn't break down in any way and he can still stay healthy for this season. In terms of how he's looked in spring, he's only made one appearance, 2 2/3 innings. So I'm sure um, they're gonna start him slow, and being a older veteran guy, he knows what it takes to get himself ready. So I'm not worried about that. So let's just rest up that body as much as needed and get him ready for the season. So as far as my expectations go, they're not super high for Charlie. Let's say maybe a minor step backwards from last season, but I think he's still going to be solid. Maybe a 4 ERA, maybe 150 innings. He's your 4th starter, but let's just stay healthy, be out there every 5th or 6th day, and contribute. And I think he'll still pick up, 10 or 12 wins and be a solid guy for you in what is likely to be his last season. Not guaranteed, but likely. Okay, let's move on to Reynaldo Lopez. So, you guys, a lot has been talked about with the Braves and who's going to be the number 5 starter. I mentioned this already. I actually think the Braves might be moving towards starting the season with 6 guys in the rotation. Nothing's been talked about with that. It's just I'm trying to read in between the lines a little bit. And yeah, obviously I could be totally wrong on that. I think it's likely that the Braves will start with Lopez and Bryce Elder in the rotation and then kind of adjust from there. And of course, how you start the season is by no means how you will finish the season. A lot can shift, um, honestly, day to day, week to week within the regular season. So I'm going to talk about Lopez, Bryce Elder, a couple other guys, but just kind of have that in mind when I'm talking about them. So in 2023, Reynaldo Lopez pitched purely out of the bullpen with a 3.27 ERA and 66 innings pitched. He pitched for multiple teams, was traded around a couple of times during the trade deadline, but was very good. The Braves actually saw him with the Angels at Truist Park, and he was lights out against them, throwing 99, 100 miles an hour out of the bullpen. So you can expect that fastball to play a tick down if he is pitching out of the rotation. But we'll get into that in just a second. But last year was probably his best year in terms of pure stuff. 11 Ks per 9 innings out of the bullpen. And he's a guy that he had early career experience as a starter, but his ERA and just his performance in general has been better out of the bullpen over the last couple of years with primarily the White Sox. So in terms of how he looks early on in spring, again, the Braves are stretching him out to possibly start. I think it is likelier than not that that's going to happen to begin the year. His fastball has been more around 96 in spring. He has made 3 appearances so far, which is a good bit early on here. 8 innings pitched, and he's looked really good, honestly. 8 innings pitched, 7 strikeouts, has only allowed 3 hits and 1 run. Performance isn't everything at this point, but it's just it's encouraging. I think the key here obviously is him getting extended. Can he pitch 6 innings in a game? Can he face a team 1 time, 2 times, 3 times through the order and still be effective? And that's going to be the ultimate challenge. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to get that challenge until actually when the season starts. Which is another reason why I just think the Braves are going to try it early on in the season and see how he does. So my expectations, again, I think it's very likely he is going to start the season in the starting rotation. I am hoping that these few years of experience in between his experiences as a starter are going to help him. He's had a lot of success the last couple of years out of the bullpen. He's coming in probably fully confident in his abilities as a major league pitcher. So I think a sub-4 ERA is realistic. I don't view Lopez as like a potential number 2 or number 3 starter, but as a number 4 or number 5 starter, he has really good stuff. I think in any given night he can come out and shut down a team if he's bringing his best stuff. But yeah, like I said, I'm not really viewing this as who is going to be the number 5 starter. Even if the Braves do go with 5 starters, we know with injury and different things, there's going to be some rotation from AAA and other places in and out of the bullpen. I could also see, maybe Lopez helps with starting depth in the first half of the season, and then other guys start to step up. Maybe an AJ Smith-Shawver or maybe a Hurston Waldrop enters the rotation because they're pitching so well in AAA, and you can just slide Lopez into the bullpen the rest of the season from there on out. I think that is another possibility. So it makes sense to me that Lopez could start the year in the rotation, but maybe not end the year in the rotation, and of no fault to his own, but that it could just, work out better for the Braves' overall pitching depth to work it that way. And again, let's talk about Bryce Elder, the other guy who is likely going to be in the back end of the rotation this year. His 2023, he had a good record, 12-4, 3.81 ERA. Really only good for a 1.8 WAR season. A lot of the peripherals on Elder are not super great. The numbers basically said he got kind of lucky in his first half of the year, and then the second half of the year was more of the reality. it might be somewhere in between there, right? But his 2023 was certainly very uneven. His first half, he was an all-star. His second half, by the numbers, he was one of the worst starters in the National League. And for him, it's just all about command. And if he was getting tired, that command definitely left him in the second half. And it was a lot of meatballs right down the middle that people were hammering out of the ballpark, and more walks, and not as many balls pounded into the ground where he was able to turn some problems, on the base pass into double plays. Um, so he's got to reclaim that. I'm sure, early on in spring, he's got hit pretty hard, 7 2/3 innings pitched, 6 earned runs allowed, 10 hits. But again, if he's a command guy, it probably takes him a little bit of time to get that reined in. So I'm not panicking about that yet, but it is something to take note of. I mean, certainly, I'm sure the Braves want him to perform reasonably well going into the regular season. Is it possible that they could start him at AAA? Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I think they would prefer not to do that. And I think it's likely that Bryce bounces back from that really bad second half again into something maybe in between his first half and second half last year. Hopefully he can improve that stamina and not just fall off a cliff in the second half this year. Now, my expectations for Bryce Elder, I think he's going to be in the rotation to start the year, like I've already said. The question is how long he'll be able to stay in the rotation, and I think it'll just be pure performance from that point forward. I'd be surprised if he makes more than 15 starts this year. Again, for a couple reasons. Number one, I'm not sure I do fully trust his performance. But then number two, the guys behind him, if a Hurston Waldrop or an A.J. Smith-Shawver are pitching great, or, the wild card to this is Ian Anderson coming off of Tommy John. Maybe he is ready, and the Braves want to give him some starts at the back end of the year. Maybe Lopez just pitches really well and takes hold of that fifth starter spot job and just doesn't let it go, right? There's a couple different things that could happen that could take away Bryce's starts. So four ERA, 4.5 ERA. I think that's something that I would expect from Bryce. I think he's going to contribute some innings to the Braves throughout the season. I don't expect him to be an all-star again. I don't know many people who are calling for that. So look, hopefully he turns it around. I like Elder when he's at his best. He's really fun to watch pitch, because he's a different type of pitcher than what they have. But I'm just not sure he can maintain what he did in the first half last year. All right, let's move on to A.J. Smith-Shawver. His 2023, he was, he only had 25 1/3 innings pitched last year, so not a lot to go off of. He had a 4.26 ERA. In those innings, he did show flashes of really great raw stuff, but I think raw is the buzzword for AJ. He was only 20 years old last year. He came up probably earlier than the Braves would have ever liked for him to make his debut, but they needed depth, right? They needed some starts. And look, the early look from AJ this spring, I really like what I'm seeing. I think the Braves have been really impressed with him this spring. He's come in throwing a couple miles per hour faster on his velocity's been up on his fastball. He's showing a curveball and a changeup, and they're inconsistent, but they are showing flashes of being really good. And we just have to remember that this guy is, he only started pitching his senior year in high school. And so there's just a lot of potential still there that he has not realized yet. And the fact that he's already debuted in the major leagues is pretty special. So I think this is a huge year for him in terms of development. I think that's why it's highly likely that he's going to start the year in AAA, and the Braves are going to allow for at least a half a season of development before they bring him back up. But that being said, I would not be shocked if he does have success at AAA and that development is showing with command and maybe a third pitch if we see him again in the second half of the season. So my expectations, I do think it's likely that one of A.J. Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop is in the Braves rotation in the second half of the season. Which one it is, I mean, that just depends on who develops quicker and who proves themselves to be ready. I think AJ might have the inside track. Waldrop has already been sent back down to the minor league camp, and AJ Smith-Shawver pitched today, Sunday, in the game against the Yankees. So he's still with the team, and I think that at least tells you a little bit about where the Braves think he is in terms of his development, the fact that they want to see him a little bit more against major league hitters. He did allow some runs, but he showed some really good stuff too. I mean, he struck out Aaron Judge. There were some really good moments for him in today's game as well. So I like what I'm seeing from AJ Smith-Shawver, especially that changeup and curveball. If that develops a little bit more, we could have a really special pitcher on our hands. All right, now let's talk about Hurston Waldrop. Of course, he has not debuted yet in the major leagues. He shot through the Braves farm system after being the Braves' first-round pick in this past season. His stuff is crazy good. We're talking 97-mile-an-hour fastball and a crazy split-finger pitch. He got 2 early appearances in spring training. Like I said, he was just sent back to minor league camp. So that guarantees pretty much he's going to start the season in the minors. And I think the Braves, they want to give him a lot of time. Either, he could start at AA or AAA, but wherever he goes, I think they want to give him plenty of time to lock in some command issues and just be a little more consistent. The command is the thing because the stuff is there. He has the potential to be really dominant. Anytime you see him on the mound, he's striking dudes out. It might be in 2 innings, there's 2 walks and 4 strikeouts. And if he can cut down the walks, then I think you're really talking about a potentially dominant pitcher. So my expectations for Waldrop this year, I think the Braves would like to keep him in the minor leagues for most of the year, if not all of the year. Again, I think AJ Smith-Shawver would be the first one to be called on, but of course, that could all change if Waldrop just dominates. If he makes the right adjustments early and he's showing that his command is really improved, yeah, I think halfway through the year, we could really see Waldrop potentially in the rotation. Again, I don't think it's necessarily likely or even a 50-50 proposition, but I think there is a path for him to make his debut this season. And I know several people are talking about that possibility. Now, the Braves' depth options are still there. A lot of guys, a lot of names you are already familiar with. Darius Vines, Dylan Dodd, Alan Winans, Huascar Ynoa, they could all make spot starts throughout the year. I have been kind of interested. Huascar Ynoa has been talked about as a potential back-end starter, or we're vying for that, and we have not seen him at all this spring so far. Remember, he is coming off of Tommy John surgery, so I don't know if that means the arm's not quite ready, or maybe the Braves are, for whatever reason, holding him off. We're still pretty early in spring training, but I would expect within the next few days, you would want to see him make his first appearance. So I'm not sure about Ynoa right now. And then, of course, Ian Anderson, I mentioned him earlier in the episode. He should not be forgotten. He could play a role in the second half for the Braves. He's coming off of Tommy John. I think it is kind of tough to think that a guy is going to provide too much coming off of Tommy John in the season he's coming back. We kind of saw that. We've seen that with a couple different Braves players in the last few seasons. So I would expect a bigger role from Ian Anderson in 2025. I have not forgotten about him. I've not given up on him. I think Ian could really provide some significant value for the Braves in 2025. But who knows? Maybe he'll come back fresh and ready to go later in this season. Okay, so as a group, when I look at all these guys and especially the top 6 as a group, a couple things I see. Number one, this is a high ceiling group of pitchers. These are pitchers with dominant stuff and the ability to strike a lot of guys out. And injuries are a question mark for every rotation. Every starting rotation in baseball has that potential at any moment for a guy to go down. But if this group of Braves pitchers stay healthy, I think they have a higher ceiling than what most outlets are projecting. And I think they have a higher ceiling than pretty much any other pitching staff in baseball. Chris Sale is a huge part of that. And I think he's the ultimate wild card of the entire starting rotation. But if Sale is healthy and you get a fully healthy Max Fried for the entire year, man, I think this starting staff is going to be just a bear to deal with for the rest of the National League. Um, the depth, right? The depth is the other thing that is way better this year than last year with Reynaldo Lopez stretched out and AJ Smith-Shawver and Hurston Waldrop getting close developmentally to the majors. The Braves just have a way better mix of depth options than they had last year. They don't have to rely on the Alan Winans and the Darius Vines and Dylan Dodds near as much. We might not even see them much this year. I mean, if things really went right health-wise, maybe we don't see those guys as much. But with Lopez being stretched out, um, and maybe having to call on an occasional depth guy, you can reduce the innings for a Charlie Morton who's 40 years old. You can reduce maybe a few starts from Chris Sale if needed. He might not need it, but if needed, or if another injury occurs, you got some guys to go to who are legitimate major league starters. And sometimes it felt like in 2023 we were throwing some guys out there who weren't very legitimate starters, and you felt like you didn't have near as much of a chance to win, or you'd have to win the game, 8-7 and that sort of thing. The other thing I really like about this starting staff is the diverse pitcher types that we have. Every pitcher is different. Seems like they all throw at a different arm angle. We have multiple lefties, multiple righties, different pitch mixes, different release points, different velocities. Everybody's different, and I think that makes it way tougher, especially when we get to the playoffs on a team. They're just going to have to deal with um, a lot of different and a lot of talented pitchers on the Brave side of things. So yeah, depth is huge for the regular season, and I think stuff is really huge for the postseason. And the Braves have both of those things. So yeah, I really like this group. Get them through spring training healthy and just let them roll. All right, now in terms of Fangraphs projecting the Braves, they project the Braves to have the third best starting rotation in baseball, behind the Dodgers at number one and the Phillies number two. Now the Dodgers were below the Braves in terms of Fangraphs, and then I think when they brought back Clayton Kershaw fairly recently, that bumped them up in terms of the overall Fangraphs projections. But I'll say this, I still like the Braves better than either of these other two starting staffs. Again, for the two reasons I just mentioned. The Braves have depth and they have a higher ceiling, especially with Chris Sale in there and with Reynaldo Lopez, who Fangraphs doesn't like in terms of projecting him that much, but I think he has a potential to be at least a solid starter when he's in there. The Phillies, here's the issue with the Phillies. They have two really, really good pitchers at the top with Wheeler and Nola. But if either one of those were to go down or miss significant time, they're hurting a lot. We saw that with the Mets. They had two top pitchers and they both got hurt and it just totally cratered their season. So obviously that's going to hurt any team, but I think the Phillies are especially, it's a problem if either of Wheeler or Nola go down. Now both of those guys have been really healthy over the last few years. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I do think that they're a little vulnerable to that. The Dodgers, there's a ton of ifs with their rotation. So, you have Walker Buehler, who's returning from Tommy John. Tyler Glass now is almost always on the injured list. Yamamoto, apparently he's really good, but he's making his entrance into the MLB. He could experience issues, and then of course Clayton Kershaw coming off of shoulder issues. I mean, there's no guarantee that he'll even pitch this year or how good he'll be. So a lot of questions with the Dodgers. The Braves, knock on wood, right? But they're coming into this season seemingly fully healthy from the starting staff. So I feel great about where the Braves are. Now, I will end this episode with a little bit of further encouragement. If you're not quite sure about this 2024 rotation for the Braves. I just want to list off what the Braves rotation looked like the last 3 seasons. Okay, so 2021, when the Braves won the World Series, their starting staff was Charlie Morton, Max Fried, Ian Anderson, Huascar Ynoa for part of the year, and Drew Smiley. I mean, you guys remember Drew Smiley pitched 120 some innings in 2021 for the Braves. So the fact that that team won a World Series is so remarkable in so many ways when I look back at that team. But their pitching staff is one way, and of course the bullpen was huge in the playoffs. But that starting staff was not dominant by any means, and the Braves were able to win the World Series. In 2022, in retrospect, this is a really good starting staff, but we didn't know it when we were going into the season. So that staff was Max Fried, Spencer Strider, Kyle Wright in his best season, Charlie Morton, and Ian Anderson. And of course, Spencer Strider started the year in the bullpen and then became dominant. Kyle Wright had his great season, but he had never really done it before that. So there were a lot of question marks going into that season. Now, 2023, last year, remember it was Max Fried, Spencer Strider, Charlie Morton, Dylan Dodd, Jared Schuster, and Bryce Elder. I mean, those last three were vying for what they thought were, the back end rotation spots. Then Fried goes down, and then it's just a piecemeal of all these guys. So, that was the situation in 2023 just a year ago. So now the Braves have a plethora of guys to choose from that are vying for this fifth starter spot. Like I said, maybe it's fifth and sixth starter spot, but there's a lot of reasons to feel good about this team, and adding a Chris Sale, who's been so good and so dominant over much of his career, to the mix just makes me feel really good. And with baseball, guys, injuries happen. With pitching especially, you just never know. But I think the Braves are in a much better situation than most teams in baseball to deal with any injuries that might crop up and still be really good. And if they have to, they can just hit their way to the playoffs and maybe get healthy by that point. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for watching another episode of State of the Braves, or listening. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.